All right. So I think we have a pretty healthy amount of participants on the call today. So for everyone that's joining the webinar today, thanks a lot for joining and taking some time out on a Friday just to listen and learn about ERG events and all things surrounding ERG events. So just by a bit of a disclaimer up front, one of our panelists is having some technical difficulties. So if she does join in at a later point, we'll get her into the Zoom webinar, but we'll go ahead and get started here with our panelists. And I would just want to take a second just to quickly introduce myself, Telescope, what we do, and then I'll pass it over to Rachee Powell just to give a quick introduction. So just by way of an introduction, my name is Maneet, Sarai. I do head of products for Telescope. Our whole mission is really just to build the most powerful enterprise community platform. When you think about communities, these can be things like ERGs, mentoring communities, philanthropic communities, and so forth. Today's webinar is really going to be focused on ERGs and mainly on ERG events. And with that said, I just want to introduce our first panelist here, Rachee Powell from FedEx. Rachee, if you wouldn't mind just jumping in and giving a quick introduction, and also just giving a little bit of background and flavor on your program, the size of it, just so audience members have an indication of the context of your program.
Sure. Thank you, Maneet. And I love the word flavor when we talk about ERGs. So my name is Rachee Powell, and I am the DEI, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Manager at FedEx Ground. A little bit about FedEx. We are committed to building and maintaining a workplace that values inclusion, diverse perspectives, and ideas that contribute to advancing and promoting the company's overall business objectives. And our employee resource groups are part of that strategy. So we currently have 11 ERGs with nearly 9,000 unique members. And our members hosted 91 events between June of 2022 and May of 2023. And the number of team members that were impacted was over 9,000. So since June of 2023, the ERGs have already hosted 10 events with more than 1,300 people impacted.
Wow, that's very cool. Excellent. So just jumping into that, Rachee, and just dovetailing into that, can you give us some insight in terms of what do these events look like in your organization? Like, what's the different types of themes that you're seeing? How do you classify those? Are these internal events? Are they external? If you can give some makeup in just terms of like overall flavors of the events, and are they impacting just internal audiences, and are they also impacting external audiences, maybe campus recruits, new employees, things like that? If you can just give us a little bit of understanding there, I think that'd be a great way to sort of segment into the remainder of the webinar as well.
Sure. So our employee resource groups, our ERG events, they include, but they're of course, they're not limited to team member retention, engagement, talent development, cultural events, and corporate social responsibility events in partnership with our FedEx Cares program, which is our global community volunteering and charitable giving. And these events are planned and executed by our ERG leaders based on a variety of subject matters that meet our DEI strategic pillars around our people, our education engagement, our communities, customers, and suppliers, and of course, our stories. So our ERG leaders are also volunteers who selflessly demonstrate their commitment to our members and the company. And so the overall impact of the events have had an employee experience that's been extremely positive. And we know that based on post-event surveys. So some of the events, some of the programs that our ERGs do that are really interesting. My favorite so far has been, well, I can't say my favorite, but there's so many. But one is the multiple FedEx Ground employee resource groups collaborated to host what is our third annual multicultural children's book drive. And that event resulted in over 37,000 books collected across the network, which impacted 50 community organizations. So when we talk about, do the ERGs impact internal and external? Definitely. The goal is to have an internal impact, but also part of our strategic plan is to impact our communities that we work and live in.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes total sense. And when you picked up a good point there, Rachee, around like post-event surveys. So when it looks at measuring like the post impact of an event, a lot of our customers always ask us like, hey, what's the follow-up? Is it just like, hey, how did you enjoy this event? Scale of 1 to 5 or something simply like that? Or is there a little bit deeper of, just sort of a level of metrics that you're trying to get to in terms of what are these events, in terms of like the enjoyment of the event, the satisfaction of it, but are you also looking a little bit deeper of like, hey, what did you get out of that event? And are you tying that back to any other sort of organizational metrics as well?
Mhm. Yep. So we want to make sure that the events have an impact on engagement and retention. So we want to know, was the event that took place, did people get knowledge from that event for ongoing career development, and a place to network outside of their daily location? So did they feel included? So some of the, in that post-event, we send out a post-event survey, which is fairly recent. And that data is critical in capturing the team member experience and their sentiment, which tells us, how people felt, right, during the events. And did they feel a call of action at the end of the event, or was it just something you showed up for? So that post-event survey, previously it was sent on occasion, but now we send it to after all events so that we can measure that impact the same way across all of the events. And then we take that information and share with our ERG leads so they know if the events are hitting home, or maybe there needs to be a little bit of change.
Yeah, and when you're seeing where it's like a little bit of change, how are you calibrating that back with like your ERG leaders, right? So obviously you mentioned like the number of events you're doing, which is immense, right? So there's tons of events that are happening quarter over quarter, year over year, and things like that. So when you're getting that feedback, what's sort of that process look like of going back to your ERG leaders and saying, hey, do we need to recalibrate, or do we do more of these types of events? If any insights you can share there, we get these questions a lot from our customers around, hey, how are we calibrating, right? How are we making sure these aren't just happy hour events where everyone's just trying to go and have a good time and things like that, and we're actually providing business value as well as employee value in these events? So any indication there on like how are you calibrating against some of that feedback you're getting, and what does the process look like?
Right. So for us, we do a monthly meeting with our employee resource group leads. And we talk about, what are the events coming up so that they can collaborate, but we also give feedback. My team is divided, and our liaisons for each of the different ERGs. So there's different levels of approval, and then we might talk about that a little bit later, but there's different levels of approval, and each of our team liaisons works directly with our employee resource group leads. So for example, our Black Professional Network employee resource group has a liaison on our team, Maya. And so Maya does a great job of working and giving feedback after the event, right? What were some of the things we saw in the comments? What were some of the things we saw in the survey? So that the employee resource groups can go back and say, maybe this event didn't hit home where we thought it would. Maybe we need to make some changes. This is what our employees would like to see, so that the employee resource groups continue to provide content that is useful. It's timely.
Yeah, so you brought up a good point there, Rachee, around the keyword of approvals and things like that. So I guess that kind of helps me segue into another topic that comes up a lot in our discussions in the industry around like governance of these events. Traditionally when we first started working with a lot of our customers, a lot of these events were sort of, just kind of decentralized, just, do the events that you want to do, what you think is best for your members. But then over time, as our companies have started to mature and they started to put more layers of processes and governance over top of these events, they've been really looking for better ways to really ensure that the events being orchestrated are aligned to corporate values. They're aligned to the various missions of either, their ERG or the overall business, and even detailing further into that, like, the planning of the event, the budget, how much are we spending on these events, the guest speakers that are coming in, how are we looking at those guest speakers and making sure that, they also mirror our corporate values and things like that. So I'd love to pick your brain and go back and forth just around like that concept of approvals, but even at a higher level, governance of these events, and maybe even historically, like, is this something FedEx has always done? Or did it kind of start with like, hey, just let the ERGs do what the events they want to do, but then over time, maybe there's some things that happen where you were like, hey, we need to have a little tighter grip over these events. So any sort of anecdotes you can share from there, I think would be incredibly helpful for the audience.
Yeah, I get a lot of questions on that as well. And there's some challenges from an employee resource group perspective. One is the policy and procedures. That's a common challenge, right? You're, as an employee, we have our policies and procedures, but also wanting to impact change, right? And work within what the mission is of that ERG. So that's one challenge. And each of our ERGs has a mission statement that they look at consistently, to make sure that they are hosting events. It's not like a party planning, this isn't a party planning group. There's a purpose for the employee resource groups, and they have a mission statement in addition to company policies that we follow. Another challenge was the standardization of the flow of communication and processes so that we create more of a professional product for our team and can have a greater impact. So we want it to look like it came, from a professional standpoint. And since our ERG leads are often, they have other jobs and responsibilities, this is a volunteer position. So creating something that was consistent across all of the ERGs is a challenge. And then the other challenge is, who is the target audience? So sometimes, defining who that target audience is for the ERGs overall. So what we have is we utilize a two-stage automated review process. And I think you know how we use that process. But we utilize a template for event review. So that way the information collected from our ERG leads is submitted in the same format from all 11 ERGs in stage 1. And that includes the purpose, the goal, the intended audience, speakers, budget requests if there is any. And ironically, not every event has a budget request or doesn't need budget to be a successful event. So then someone from our team on the DEI team reviews the event and then coordinates with appropriate stakeholders. And that might be legal, that might be vetting a guest speaker, again, budget review. And then after the liaison has completed stage 1, they either approve the event or they disapprove the event. And if it's disapproved, the event returns to the group lead and detailing why. Right? We want to give why, because there's a reason why they wanted to host the event. So if there's a reason why, we want to go back and talk about it. And maybe it's just additional details that are needed before approval is granted. So then when the event is approved, the request goes to stage 2 for DEI manager review. And then this is where the final checks and balances happens, just to ensure that the event adheres to our corporate policies, procedures, is still in alignment with the DEI's mission statement. It may be any changes that may have come up since the initial request. And then once it's approved there, the ERG can publish the event on a shared calendar. And that assists the team in seeing all of the upcoming events in one place, which goes back to the professionalism. We don't have to go look for the information. The communication is there. All of our ERGs have executive level sponsors who attend and support and are even guest speakers for the events. And we don't have to twist their arm. They're happy to be there. And that's a big asset in getting collaboration with our employee resource groups. So one very nice thing about the process is that it gives us an efficient way to add structure and professionally communicating events. And really has helped our leads to overcome some challenges in scheduling and then the outreach to the full FedEx team about the events, because we want the whole team to know. It's not any good if it's just, a specific department or area that knows. We want everybody on the FedEx Ground team to be able to participate in the events.
Right. Absolutely. And when it comes to that visibility component of it, right? So, traditionally, when we start working with a lot of our customers, a lot of these events, like, as you mentioned, they're kind of all over the place, right? Like some of them might be on Outlook, some of them might be, on a third-party service like Eventbrite or something like that, just depending on the nature of the event. Some of them might be posted on like a SharePoint site or so forth. But in terms of like the visibility of the events, and also trying to make sure that, not even the executive sponsorship, but everywhere down to maybe an intern that just joined the organization knows where these events are happening, knows how to get into these events, knows like the topics of these events. How have you seen like the visibility of at least the FedEx Ground ERG events increase over time? Are you seeing more executives attending? Are you seeing more folks from outside of the particular hosting ERG wanting to attend these events as well? Any anecdotes on that from your perspective there, Rachee?
So one of the things we look at in impact is the membership and how has the membership changed? And we've seen an increase in all levels of participation, but not only participation, but wanting to collaborate across events, because now you know what's going on in some of the other ERGs. So you see people at all levels attend, participate, comment, provide feedback, which is nice because it makes us all feel heard, right? Everybody's included. No one's afraid to share feedback. What it also does is it gives us that professional look. There's a meeting invite. It's on our calendar. If we want to exclude the full FedEx team and not just FedEx Ground, we can do that as well. Many of the topics are the same. So if we're talking about mental health, that's important regardless of your position in the company or your title, right? Or which operating company. So we've seen an increase in that, and those are some of the data that we actually look at that we share with the ERG leads as far as hosting and the type of events.
Right. And have you seen a lot of your ERGs collaborating moving forward now? So a lot of our customers, they've collaboration when it comes to ERGs is like kind of difficult. For one, there's 2 membership lists, right? And more important than that, let's say you're a part of one ERG and I'm a part of another ERG and I get an invite from your group. I might be like, hey, why did I get this invite, right? I'm not a part of this group. And so this has been something that we've been trying to work with our customers for quite a bit, just to be able to ensure that, hey, these events are true collaborative events, right? In nature, where any person who gets that invite knows exactly why they've been invited, because it says, hey, this is a collaborative event and so forth. But the other thing I'd like to pick your brain on, Rachee, is like, how do you see those impacting? So seeing, maybe your African-American network and maybe a women's ERG coming together and share and discussing ideas or topics, and what do those ideas look like? Are you seeing more of that happening in the FedEx environment around ERGs pairing up? And then dovetailing off of that too, like, how does that work from a governance standpoint as well, the budgets and whatnot? How are you looking at that from your purview?
That's 3 questions, Maneet. So, but we do. So we encourage our ERGs to collaborate. So, because our membership, the invitations from, for example, our Women Moving Ground, they'll send out an invitation to their team, their members, and it just goes to their members. But when they're collaborating, now it goes to their members and the other ERG they are collaborating with. So it increases the span of who is there. It also, I'll give you an example. Our Women Moving Ground and our Men Leading Inclusively, 2 of our employee resource groups, are planning an event where they are talking about allyship. So when we send out an event, an announcement on an event, both teams will get that information. Both members will get it, and they can see the importance and who the ERG is that's hosting. So the question isn't necessarily there of, well, who's hosting it and why am I getting it? You can see why. It's right there and available. So that's increased the attendance on the calls. And then from there, it increases the conversation around other opportunities for calls, other topics that they may want to hear about that's relative to both groups. Even on the event I talked about, the Multicultural Books Club, our book drive, I always say the book club, the book drive, where more than 37,000 books were collected. That was a collaboration across many of our employee resource groups. And that also brought attention to each of the individual groups that we have. So, and thus increasing membership for all of them.
Right. And as you've seen these events evolve over time, and they become more paramount, because now you're saying, hey, we have a very professional look. These are being routed on centralized calendars and in the inboxes of employees. And I'm sure just at FedEx, I mean, some of these groups might be huge, right? 5,000 plus members per each group. How have you seen the interaction with leadership and senior executives in the organization? And are there particular metrics that they want to know about these events? And do they want to know, are they customers of that data? I guess you can look at it from that perspective. And if so, what are the key things that they're looking at in terms of, hey, Rachee, we know you're doing all these fabulous events, but like, is there a so what factor here? And any insights there, Rachee, from your end, and at least from the FedEx point of view?
We love numbers. So we love data, and we love where's there going to be an impact. So absolutely. Each of our ERGs has a sponsor, an executive sponsor. And when we provide feedback to those sponsors, not only do we provide feedback, but the ERG leads do as well. What do their events look like? What's been the impact and what has been the engagement? How can we take this event and then share it and have an impact on our external community, external to our FedEx team? And how does that tie? One example of that is our mental health calls. So our ERGs over the last year have hosted mental health calls. Mental health is extremely important, right? And making sure that people have that information, but what do I do, right? What are the next steps? And so over the last year, the ERGs have hosted mental health calls. And this year, our ERGs are taking those mental health calls and stepping it up a level. And those are shared with the entire network, not just inside their ERG, but our executive team gets on that, and we share stories, right? Having a common story that we can share in the team is very impactful. So our ERG leads and the sponsors participate in those calls, but we can also provide data on what was the impact. And the impact is really important, right? We don't want to have an event where there's 500 people on the call and everybody's like, when the call is over, right? We want there to be a call of action so that they tell someone else this is a great event, and this ERG is doing well. Our executive team also wants to know that. So what is it that we're doing, and how is engagement improved? How is participation improved? Here's a gap here where we see that the ERG is not, maybe we're not participating. We don't have as high participation in this area of the company, because on our metrics, we can see where our members are. So maybe we don't have as high of participation in that area of the company. What can we do to increase participation in that particular area. And that's where we can use, that's also where we use the data, and we can share that with our executives.
Right, right. And one thing I've always noticed about ERG events is like they're really big, right? Hundreds and hundreds of people that are attending these events. And is that a unique thing about within FedEx, at least with your ERG events versus maybe other corporate wide events? Of course, if there's a CEO town hall, then that's going to be a pretty big event. But the ERG ones, you start really looking at some of the numbers, especially on the dashboards when you're looking at it, and you're like, there's hundreds and hundreds of people that are showing up to these events. And is that sort of an anomaly just for FedEx, or would you say even in your experience, like just ERG events, they just garner that type of attention and there's that much interest in the organization for people to say, hey, let me take this time out of my day and go and attain these resources and things like that?
What I find interesting about the ERG events is that these are volunteer, right? So when they show up to an event that's being hosted, it's people have intentionally taken time to join the event. Unlike if there's a call for your department, you kind of expect it to be there.
Right.
So when you have a high attendance at an ERG event, that someone took the time to attend. They took the time to accept the invitation, to log on, provide feedback. So we really look at that. And then that's where the difference comes in. These are events, and that's why it's important that we look at the impact of the event, right? Is it an event, do we look at even the title that they're sharing? Does it attract interest? Does it encourage people to participate? Because that makes a difference. And we work with our comms team to say, because I'm not a professional writer, so we get people who are to create titles so that people want to come to the event, because there's a lot of information. You go back again, was there, were the employees engaged? Did they feel like they got some education from attending the event? Did they feel like they were able to network outside of their normal, the normal people they network on a daily basis, right? Attending ERG events, you're able to, I'm in Indiana, but I can network with people in California. And are these events providing that opportunity?
No, that makes total sense. So I'm just keeping an eye on the clock here. We do have some questions in the chat that are directed for you, Rachee. So let me just jump into these. So the first one is, does your DEI group ever need legal to approve on any of these events?
Yes.
Yeah.
So part of our process is the DEI team is very familiar with our policies and procedures, but we do submit for legal review just to make sure that we stay in compliance with the company objectives.
Gotcha. And when you're interacting with legal, are they just kind of looking at this from a lens of, hey, we're not crossing, sort of any of our thresholds or risk thresholds or anything like that? Or are there other ways they're weighing in terms of privacy regulations that you might have to adhere to? What are you displaying about the event? Is it sort of like a 1 point thing that legal's looking at, or is it really like a matrix of things that they have to really analyze?
So the DEI team, my team really does all that during level 1. Right, just based on the policies and procedures and best practices that we share. So we try to make it as easy for our legal team as possible and address anything that comes up from level 1. Once we send it to our legal, they're at an overview, making sure that we are in compliance with company standards and policies. And if there's any feedback at that point, they give us that feedback.
Gotcha. Perfect. All right. So just jumping into this next question here. So I guess at a high level, they just want to know, could you give us an overview of the 11 ERGs at FedEx? Maybe not list out all 11 if you don't have them off the top of mind, but maybe a couple of them if you would. But then there's a second part to that question that says, do you ask for the automated process for all events initiatives or just key signature events? So I guess that's a pretty good question there. So is this just for the big signature events, or are you running every single ERG event into the process as well?
So every single one of our events goes through that process. And if it's a bigger, regardless of the event, just that way we're consistent in our professionalism across all the events and how it's communicated and shared out. So every event goes through and is looked at. And the more familiar the ERG lead is with the process, the easier it is. Okay, and so you're gonna test my knowledge on my memory. So we've got an Asian and Pacific Islander network, a Black Professionals network, EPIC, which is Emerging Professionals Inspiring Change, Enable, which is enabling all employees, Han Hispanic Action Network, Men Leading Inclusively, Parents Delivering Purple, Project Professionals Enablement League, Pride and Allies Network, a Veterans Network, and Women Moving Ground.
There you go. That's how you know you're the leader of them. All right, so we probably have time for one more question here. Let me just look through the list. All right. So how long does the approval process take? And how far in advance does an ERG need to submit an event for approval?
Good question. So we actually have a process in place for our ERG leads, because we want to make sure that the event has enough time for it to get out in front of people to attend. So once it's submitted, we usually ask for a week just to make sure that our team can get through the level 1 and get to level 2. And sometimes there's a catch with that. There's more research that needs to be done, more touches, more bases touched. So usually a week is what we ask. For our communications plan, we like to get everything out at least 2 weeks in advance, so that people can see it. If you share the week of, people's schedules are different, might be on vacation. So to get the maximum participation, we do have a communications plan in place that we share with our leads, and we follow that plan.
Yeah, perfect. Excellent. All right. So for the audience, I know we are at time here. We are capping this at a 30-minute webinar. There's a couple other questions that we'll take note of and perhaps send them out to our panelists here for them to respond to, and then we'll send a note out. We do thank everyone for joining here. We had really good participation throughout the call. We will have a recording of this as well, which we'll distribute for folks who might have not been able to attend due to scheduling conflicts. But foremost, I just want to take a thank you for Rachee, Powell, just for joining the webinar, spending some time on a Friday, of course. Just giving this insight, right? Because a lot of our customers, these are the questions that just like come to us, come throughout like the industry and things like that. So sometimes hearing it firsthand from an actual practitioner is super helpful, and just things that you can take back. So Rachee, thank you so much for joining today. We really appreciate everyone for joining. Thanks a lot, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.